Hello, my name is JB. I live in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and today I'm going to talk about how I learned to speak Spanish. I originally am from North Carolina, and where I grew up, when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, there weren't really that many people from other countries where I lived. There were mostly white people, African American people, and that was pretty much it. We had a few other people from different places, but not very many. It wasn't very common to meet people from foreign countries. Um, in elementary school, we had Spanish class, and the Spanish teacher would come by once every 2 weeks or so, maybe once a month, I can't remember, for an hour. And she would teach us words, we would play games, we would um, just do different activities to learn Spanish. And mostly what we learned is the ABCs, numbers, letters, days of the week, months of the year, um, the seasons. And we learned lots of very basic words like dog, cat, car, house, these kinds of things. And but we never learned how to speak Spanish. Really, we just learned how to pronounce words well enough to where somebody might know what we were saying. And I think the way that we learned Spanish, only having class once every 2 weeks or 1 month or whatever it was, we forgot a lot. So whatever we learned, we had to relearn it next time. And over the summer, we would forget, and then we'd have to relearn it again. And we didn't even, though I was in school for 13 years, we didn't learn a whole lot. Especially in the beginning when the classes were that way, where we'd only have class once a week. Then in middle school, I think I took Spanish. I remember taking Spanish at least 1 year for a semester. It may have been multiple. I can't remember, but we didn't learn a whole lot. A little bit more advanced than it was in elementary school, but not very much. We weren't like having conversations or anything like that. We would just learn basic vocabulary words, and that was about it. Then in high school, in 10th grade, I took French for part of a semester until I moved and had to take a different class because they didn't have French at my new school. Um, but I I learned more French in that class than I did Spanish in all the other years that I had taken Spanish because of the way it was taught. And they in that class, the teacher, 10th grade at Monroe High School, she explained the system, like how it works, how sentences are structured, how verbs are conjugated, those kinds of things. And so for me, that's kind of how my brain works. I want to know how something, um, how system works. And a language is a system. Then in the second half of 10th grade, I was at a different school. I was at West Rowan, and I took Spanish. And I had this teacher. His name was Mr. Schoaf. He was he was a nice guy, but he really didn't speak that much Spanish. But he spoke it well enough to teach the class at that grade level, and he was interested in it. He cared about it. It was important to him, and he it was important to him that we learned, and we did learn quite a bit in there. Um, at least we learned a lot of vocabulary, and then we learned more about the system, like I was talking about earlier, how the language actually works, um, and that sort of thing. But at that point, I still wasn't having conversations, and I wasn't um, really speaking the language. Then in 11th grade, I was at 11th grade. I was at Parkwood High School in North Carolina, and I had this teacher. His name was Mr. Stegall, Jim Stegall. He called himself Stegall, Jim Stegall, but Stegall. And this guy was really interesting to me because he had been in the army, and he was a translator, and he had worked in a bunch of Latin American countries, and he had all these stories about these cool places that he went and things that he did and stuff. Really neat guy. And I used to give him a hard time because I gave all my teachers a hard time. But I actually liked this guy. I respected him. I never told him that, at least then. And I thought he was a cool guy. And but I used to give him a hard time. And but I learned a lot in his class. I got way better at speaking Spanish, um, knowing how to pronounce words, and being able to read it fairly decently. But you know, for me at that time, it was just a class, and so I took the class and I did well, and it was fine. But I wasn't really like, how do you call this? Um, Very enthusiastic about speaking Spanish at that point. Then, the same year in the 11th grade, I was working at a Taco Bell in Monroe, North Carolina. And there we had a lot of people, especially the times of day that I worked, that spoke Spanish. Most of them, I think all of them, were from Mexico. And a lot of times, even though some of them spoke English as well, they would speak Spanish to each other, and they wouldn't provide a translation. You know, if someone there could translate, they wouldn't do that. They would just have their conversation and then keep going. But when they would do that, when they would talk and laugh and do all that and have their conversations, I felt left out because sometimes I understood some words, especially at that point, cuss words. I understood those and insults and that sort of thing. But I didn't speak really well. I didn't understand everything. So uh, I had a friend who worked there. His name was Dolores Hernandez, and he was a strange guy, but he was cool. He was nice, and even though I was underage, a lot of times me and him would hang out and drink beer. I was 16 or 17, and he would drink beer with me, and he would tell me about Mexico, and I would ask him a lot of questions about what it's like there and all that stuff. And I started really getting interested in Spanish-speaking countries, especially Mexico, and other ones, and thinking about what it would be like to travel there and stuff like that. But because of that, the fact that a lot of the people that worked at the Taco Bell, they spoke Spanish to each other, and I felt left out, I really started wanting to learn about Spanish, and I listened very closely when they spoke, and I asked them questions, and I asked them to teach me how to say things, and I just paid a lot more attention to the language. Whenever I saw something that was in Spanish, I tried to learn what it was. At that point, that was the early 2000s. There were a lot more Latinos in North Carolina than before, but there weren't really that many. And Spanish wasn't spoken everywhere like it is now. You couldn't find Spanish like newspapers or magazines or things to read. There weren't signs in Spanish. There weren't everything that's written in Spanish now. You can live in North Carolina where I live now and only speak Spanish, and you'll be fine. You'll be able to speak Spanish at the government office, at your job, to the police, to anywhere, a store, anywhere that you need to go, you can speak Spanish there. It's fine. But back then it wasn't the case, and so that made it a lot harder to learn. But then I moved to Central Avenue, which was in East Charlotte, and that area had a lot of Latino people, most of them from Mexico, but not all of them. And that's where I really started learning, because even though I had been influenced by my experience at Taco Bell, I just wasn't able to learn that quickly. But there, in East Charlotte, I could speak Spanish all the time. I could go to Spanish stores. I could go to Spanish restaurants. I could speak to my neighbors who only spoke Spanish. I would hang out with them after work. I would drink beer with them, talk to them in Spanish, um, have them talk to me in Spanish, and I would learn very quickly. And even at my work, I did tile and marble for my uncle's tile company, one my grandfather started and my dad helped build. And there were several guys there who spoke Spanish, so I spoke with them in Spanish, and they taught me some stuff, and I learned quite a lot. And then in college, I was taking college classes at night at CPCC, Central Piedmont Community College, and I took a Spanish class there. Learned a lot there because that was more like immersion. Because the teacher, he only spoke Spanish. He didn't speak English. He didn't offer translations in English. Um, it was tough for a lot of people, but it wasn't that hard for me because I wanted to do that. That's the way I wanted to learn. And so, I learned how to read better, write better, speak better, and I started um, getting closer to like thinking in Spanish. And then one day I was in geography class at CPCC at night after work, and there was a guy in there, and he was standing up looking at a map before class, and he said, El Paso, Texas. I said, yeah, what about it? He said, yeah, I went there one time, and do you know that all you have to do is walk across a bridge to go to Mexico? And I said, really? I said, you can walk across a bridge and go to Mexico? He said, yeah. That's all you got to do. I thought that was amazing. That was really cool. Because, a lot of times when you think about other countries, you think about having to fly and do all that. And he's like, no, you just walk across the bridge. And so sometime after that, I don't remember exactly how long after it was, but I went traveling. I left my job working for my uncle, and I went traveling across the country, and I went to New Orleans, Austin, El Paso, and when I was in El Paso, I crossed the bridge, like he said, and I went to Ciudad Juarez for the first time, which is in the state of Chihuahua. I don't recommend going there because it's too dangerous. A lot of bad things have happened to me there over the years, but I'm glad I went there because it was my first introduction to a foreign country, and it inspired me in a lot of ways. But I went there, and I was speaking Spanish, and trying to pick up women and all this kind of stuff, and talking shit to people in the bars, and at the markets and stuff, you have to like haggle with them. So I was doing that, not very well, but doing my best, And yeah. And then after that, I ended up settling in Tucson and Arizona, and that's not very far from the border. So I went to Mexico many times from there. But over the years, I've traveled to like 16 states in Mexico. I've traveled all over Nicaragua, Honduras, Puerto Rico, which is actually part of the United States. But in all those places, I have learned Spanish because there, not in all places, but in most places in Spanish-speaking countries, you have to speak Spanish because they're not going to speak to you in English. If you go to some tourist places, you can speak English and you're fine, or in any other language. But there, you have to speak Spanish. And so that was really good for me because I was immersed. If I wanted to eat, I had to figure out how to tell them what I wanted, and figure out how much money they wanted for it, and all that. And if I want to go to a store, everything is all the food and everything has labels in Spanish, so you have to be able to read the label and do that. And then if you needed information like from a sign or from a newspaper or from a magazine, you have to read in Spanish, so you're kind of forced to learn. And then when you turn on the radio or listen to TV or watch TV, everything is in Spanish, so you're just, it's in your face. And it is, when you're immersed in another language, it's much more like when you learned English, if you speak English. Because when you learned English, you were, 1, 2, 3 years old, you didn't know any other language. But when you wanted something, you had to figure out how to say, Mom, I want milk. Mom, I want some food. Mom, I want to go to sleep. Mom, I'm not happy. Whatever. You had to figure out how to say that. And so you were forced to learn, and you did learn because of survival, because you needed to survive. And plus, your mom and your dad or whoever was with you was talking to you in English or in whatever language you learned first. And so you're having it constantly put in your face, just the same way that when I was traveling to Mexico and those other countries, I was immersed in it. And so much easier to learn that way rather than just like reading some words out of a dictionary or whatever. But so basically, the way that I learned Spanish is by using every resource possible. So I took some classes, like I mentioned. Then I um, started trying to read by finding whatever resources I could find. I traveled to places where people spoke Spanish. I even before that, I was speaking to people at my workplace at the Taco Bell who spoke Spanish, and then in my neighborhood where I lived in East Charlotte, speaking Spanish that way. Um, and I mean, there was a time where I wanted to improve my vocabulary, so I just started copying Spanish dictionaries. And I don't think that was a very effective way to learn, but I did learn a lot of vocabulary. And I would try to learn like 8 words a day or 10 words a day. And if you do that, 10 words a day times 365 days a year, that's 3,650 words per year. And you know, an average vocabulary in any language is like 7, 8,000 words, something like that. So after a couple of years, if you learn 10 words a day, you might not be fluent because you might not know how to put all the words together, but at least you'll have a really good vocabulary. But another thing I did was this wasn't a choice really. This is just what happened. I ended up working in seafood processing and meat packing plants for more than 15 years, and in a lot of those places, most of the workers spoke Spanish. A lot of them were from Mexico, but a lot of other places too. And I had to learn how to speak Spanish better so that I could communicate with them. And I was also a union steward and advocate for the rights of workers. So in order to do those things, I had to communicate with the workers, understand what their problems were, understand what their needs were, and just be able to understand enough about the situations that they were in order to help them. So I was speaking Spanish a lot, and I think the most important thing you can do is to practice. You know, that should kind of go without saying, but it's true. You're not gonna just get good at speaking Spanish. You're not just gonna say, "Well, I want to speak Spanish," and then the next day you wake up and you speak Spanish. That's not how it works. You have to want to do it, and once you want to do it, and you do it, and you practice, and you make it a part of your life and what you do, then you'll learn. Because I know people all the time that say, "Oh yeah, I want to learn Spanish." I say, "No, you don't." And they say, "What do you mean?" I say, "Well, if you wanted to learn Spanish, you would already be speaking Spanish because you've been saying that for a while now, and you haven't made any effort to learn." It's like if somebody says, "I want to be rich," and you say, "No, you don't," because you just sleep all day and you never work. You don't want to be rich. If you really wanted to be rich, you'd be making some kind of effort. But yeah, like I think the reason that I was able to learn Spanish, and I learned it late, and it's hard to learn late, but the reason I was able to learn is because it's something that I really wanted, and it's something that I really needed too, because I needed to be able to do that to do my job and to speak to other people. Um, so I was able to do it, but like if I had not put in the effort that I put in and not had the desire that I did, I wouldn't be able to speak Spanish. And that's probably true for every other thing that I've done too. I wouldn't have been able to do the things that I've done unless I really wanted to do it. It's not just going to come to you. But if you don't speak Spanish and you want to learn, uh, I would encourage you to do it. And the reason is because, um, you know, if you speak English, you can talk to all the other people in the world who speak English, but you can't talk to anybody else, or you can talk to them, but they won't understand you. So it's not gonna be effective communication. But if you speak Spanish, also, you can speak to all the other people in the world who speak Spanish, and they're all over the world, believe it or not. Um, Mostly in Latin America, but also in Spain, all over Europe, and in different places like Africa and Asia. Sure, I've met people from Australia who speak Spanish, believe it or not. And so people all over the world speak Spanish. And it's really important to be able to talk to more people. And like here in the United States, if you speak English but you also speak Spanish or some words or some phrases or some um, sentences, you can have simple conversation. Um, it's a way that um, you can um, benefit yourself, because if you go up to someone who only speaks Spanish and you have a conversation with them in Spanish, or say some words, or just say hola, ¿cómo estás? Hello, how are you? They'll be like impressed by that, and they'll like that, and they'll like you. And I know that when I go up to people in the United States who speak Spanish, or in other countries, and I start speaking to them in Spanish, and I'm having a full conversation with them, they're like, wow, this guy's amazing. And maybe I'm not amazing, but I'm amazing to them, because they find it really interesting that I can do something they can do, and that I can communicate with them. And they believe, and it's true, that I understand them better, and I do, because I know how to speak their language. I know some things about their culture. I know about their lives a little bit, just based on what I know about culture and the different countries where people speak Spanish. And so people will be really impressed by that, and they'll like you, and they'll support you, and you can win their favor, win their help for you. And so I think that my decision to learn Spanish has improved my life, in a lot of ways, because it's helped me use parts of my brain that I wasn't using before. It's opened up things to me, taught me about different people, different places in the world. I can understand different people's ideas and learn from them by listening to them. And so, and I'm also able to use it to benefit myself and others when I'm, advocating for workers, or teaching people things in Spanish, or anything like that. And I'm also able to share my ideas. And like now, it's very helpful if you can speak two languages for most workplaces. Not all, but most. So if you speak Spanish, that's something else that gives you value. Not to say if you don't speak Spanish, you don't have value, but when you're going for a job, you can say, "Oh, also I'm bilingual. I speak Spanish and English," and your person that is interviewing you might say, "Oh, wow, that's really interesting, because we have a lot of Spanish-speaking people, and we have a really hard time serving them because we don't know what they want. But if you can speak Spanish, you can help us sell our product or offer our service or whatever." So they might like you. And I think it's always a good idea to learn new things. And so if you want to speak Spanish, do it. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye.